There are sounds in this life you never expect to hear, and then there are the sounds that instantly shatter the quiet rhythm of your entire existence, like the shrill, persistent ringing of a landline phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, cutting through the dark silence of a modest house in Lahore. My name is Tariq, and at 52 years old, I thought I had experienced the full measure of life's griefs and quiet burdens. I am a retired clerk, a man who finds comfort in predictability, in the precise weight of a ceramic tea mug between my palms, the familiar creak of my reading chair, and the steady, solitary routine of keeping a home clean and quiet. For years, my world has consisted of little more than these walls, the morning call to prayer echoing from the neighborhood mosque, and the ghosts of a family that existed only in faded photographs and quiet prayers. So when I lifted the heavy black receiver of the landline from its cradle, wiping the sleep from my eyes, I expected a wrong number. I expected the static hum of an international line dropped halfway across the globe. Instead, a crisp, professional voice spoke from the receiver, carrying the undeniable, sterile cadence of airport authority. "Mr. Tariq Khan?" "Yes," I answered, my voice raspy, thick with sleep. "Speaking." "Sir, this is Terminal Operations at Allama Iqbal International Airport. We have an incoming passenger from Manchester, flight PK709, who has just cleared immigration. Her baggage is unclaimed at Carousel 4, and your name and number were listed on her emergency declaration form as the primary local guardian and pickup contact. She is waiting at the arrival lounge gate, sir. We need you to come and collect her." A cold, heavy stone dropped straight to the bottom of my stomach. The bedroom around me, cast in the dim, blue-gray light of a pre-dawn July morning, suddenly felt entirely alien. "There must be some mistake," I said slowly, every word tasting like dry dust in my mouth. "I think you have the wrong person. I don't have a daughter." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, the faint sound of rustling paper and terminal announcements echoing in the background. Then, the officer spoke again, his tone softening with polite confusion. "Sir, the passenger's name is Alize Khan. Age 24. She presented her passport, pointed right at your name and this exact telephone number, and told our staff that her father was on his way. She's standing right here, Mr. Khan. And she looks like she's been crying for hours." The receiver felt impossibly heavy in my hand. Alize. 24. A daughter whose name I had never spoken, whose face I had never seen, and whose existence I had spent the last 2 decades desperately trying to bury beneath the quiet dignity of a lonely life. The silence that followed in that dim, narrow hallway felt heavier than the concrete floor beneath my bare feet. 24 years. 2 decades and 4 years since the winter morning I packed a single worn suitcase, walked out of a suffocating house in Islamabad, and severed every tie to a past that threatened to drown me. Before that phone call shattered the fragile peace I had built, my life was measured in minutes of quiet predictability. I lived alone in a modest, single-story house in Lahore, surrounded by the scent of old paperbacks, cardamom tea, and freshly washed cotton. Every morning at 6, I would sweep the small front porch, greet the neighborhood stray cat who always waited by the gate, and spend my hours tending to my small terrace garden. People in the neighborhood knew me as a quiet, respectful man, a retired clerk who kept to himself, never bothered anyone, and wore his solitude like a well-worn coat. I never married again. After the bitter wreckage of my youth, and the absolute finality of the choice I made to walk away, I decided that love was a luxury I could not afford, and family was a risk too great to take twice. I built a fortress out of routine. Yet, standing there in the dark with the phone pressed against my ear, all those carefully stacked bricks came tumbling down. Alize. 24 years old. The name echoed in my mind with a terrifying familiarity. 2 decades ago, when I left, there was no child. Or at least, none that I was ever allowed to know about. My marriage to a woman from a wealthy, influential family had been an arranged disaster, a union built on social status and family pressure, choked by constant silent wars and bitter expectations. When I finally packed my bags, my wife's family made it clear with chilling coldness, whatever was tied to me was dead to them. They told me to disappear, to change my name, to pretend I had never existed. And in my cowardice, my exhaustion, and my desperate need to survive, I did. "Sir," the airport official's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, pulling me back to the harsh fluorescent reality of the phone line. "Are you still there? The young lady is looking quite distressed. She says her phone battery is dead, and she has no other local contacts." My hand trembled. A drop of cold sweat traced a slow path down my temple. I understand," I managed to whisper, my throat tightening. "Listen to me carefully. Do not let her leave the terminal. Tell her someone is coming. Just give me an hour." I slammed the receiver back onto its cradle. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mind raced through a dozen impossible scenarios. Was this a cruel joke? Some elaborate trap set by ghosts from my past? Or worse, was it real? Had a child I never knew existed spent 24 years believing I abandoned her, only to cross oceans to find a father who didn't even know she breathed? I walked over to the small wooden wardrobe in my bedroom, my fingers shaking as I pulled out the iron key to the bottom locked drawer. The neat stacks of old tax receipts and retirement papers lay a dusty, leather-bound diary from 25 years ago. I flipped open the brittle pages, my eyes stinging as I stared at my own handwriting from a life I had tried to erase. If Alize was 24, she was born months after I left. Her mother must have kept my name alive, or perhaps used it as a shield, or a question, or a curse. I looked at the clock on the wall. 4:15 a.m. The distance from my house to Allama Iqbal International Airport was at least 45 minutes with early morning traffic. My old Suzuki car was parked outside, reliable enough, but my legs felt weak beneath me. I didn't want to go. Every instinct I had honed over 22 years screamed at me to lock the doors, turn off the phone, and pretend the call had never happened. To protect my peace. To protect the lonely, safe world I had carved out of stone. But then I thought of a 24-year-old girl standing alone at a baggage carousel in a massive international terminal, staring at a dead phone, waiting for a ghost to show up. The drive to the airport felt like moving through a heavy, suffocating dream. The pre-dawn streets of Lahore were mostly quiet, save for the occasional delivery truck rumbling past or a stray motorcycle cutting through the shadows. Behind the wheel of my old Suzuki, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Every street lamp we passed cast a brief, harsh yellow glare across the dashboard, illuminating the lines of exhaustion etched deep into my face. My mind was a chaotic storm of questions. Why now? Why after 24 years of absolute silence would a daughter I never knew cross continents to find me? If her mother's influential family had driven me out with such vicious determination, what on earth had they told Alize about her father? Did she think I was a monster who abandoned her by choice? Or did she come looking for an answer, a reckoning, or perhaps a sanctuary from a life that had finally broken her? As I turned into the sprawling approach of Allama Iqbal International Airport, the towering glass facade and the bright white glow of the arrival terminal came into view. My stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. For over 2 decades, I had guarded my solitude like a precious treasure, believing that distance and time could erase the sins of the past. But sitting here in the parking lot, watching tired travelers drag their suitcases toward the sliding glass doors, I realized that some debts are never truly written off. They just wait quietly in the dark until the bill comes due. I parked the car in a corner spot, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet cabin for a long moment. I took a deep, shaky breath, closed my eyes, and tried to steady the frantic rhythm of my heart. Then, pushing the door open, I stepped out into the cool morning air and walked inside. The International Arrival Hall was a cavernous space filled with the low hum of chatter, the rolling rumble of luggage wheels, and the sharp announcements echoing from the overhead speakers. I kept my head down, navigating past clusters of waiting families holding bouquets of flowers and welcome signs. My eyes scanned the crowd near Carousel 4, looking for the face I had imagined 1,000 times during my darkest, loneliest nights. And then, I saw her. She was sitting alone on a metal bench near the exit gates, resting her elbows on her knees with her face buried in her hands. A large, worn leather suitcase stood right beside her, bearing a tangle of airline tags from Manchester. She wore a simple dark jacket, and her long hair fell in soft, tired waves over her shoulders. Even sitting still, there was a profound, heartbreaking vulnerability in the way she carried herself, the posture of someone who had traveled across the world entirely alone, running out of hope with every passing minute. I froze in my tracks about 20 feet away. My breath caught in my throat. Without realizing it, I muttered her name aloud. Alize. At the sound of my voice, her head snapped up. Her eyes, red-rimmed, swollen from hours of exhausting tears, and carrying a hauntingly familiar gaze that instantly unlocked memories I had buried half a lifetime ago, locked directly onto mine. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The noisy airport around us seemed to melt away into absolute silence. She didn't look angry, or triumphant, or demanding. She just looked like a young woman who had finally reached the end of a very long, very dark road, staring face to face with a ghost she was never certain actually existed. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Alize stood up from the bench. Her lower lip trembled, and for a terrifying second, I thought she might turn around and run away, or scream at me for the decades of absence carved into my face. Instead, she took one step forward, then another, closing the distance between us with heavy, measured steps. Are you Tariq?" Her voice was a cracked whisper, barely audible over the hum of the terminal. I managed to say, my own voice breaking, thick with a lifetime of unspent tears. "I'm your father, Alize." The moment those words left my lips, the last remaining wall around my heart collapsed entirely. She didn't yell. She didn't demand explanations or hurl accusations. She simply let out a long, shuddering sob and closed the remaining space, burying her face against my chest as her arms wrapped tightly around my waist. I stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the shock of a father's embrace washing over me like a tidal wave. Then, slowly, my arms rose and wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close against me. In that quiet embrace amid the bustling chaos of the airport, 24 years of loneliness, silence, and bitter regret simply melted away. I held her as she wept, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her back, realizing with staggering clarity that life had just handed me the one thing I never knew I was missing, a second chance at being human. Later, as we sat together in the quiet warmth of my small living room, sipping hot tea while the morning sun finally broke through the curtains, Alize began to piece together the fragments of her story. She told me of a mother who had kept my memory alive not out of love, but as a bitter warning, until the truth finally surfaced, driving her to cross oceans just to find the only piece of genuine family she had left. She was running from a life of cold luxury and suffocating expectations, seeking shelter in the humble, quiet home of a man she had only known through whispered secrets. As I looked across the table at her, seeing my own quiet resilience mirrored in her tired yet hopeful eyes, I understood the deep, humbling lesson life had quietly taught me. We can spend decades running from our past, trying to build impenetrable walls around our solitude, but love has a stubborn way of finding us when we least expect it. Sometimes, the heaviest burdens we carry are simply doors waiting to be unlocked. The storm outside my window had long since passed, leaving behind the clean, damp scent of morning rain and the gentle chirping of sparrows on the terrace railing. Across the wooden kitchen table, Alize was fast asleep, her head resting softly against her folded arms, exhausted by the monumental journey that had finally brought her home. I gently draped a woolen shawl over her shoulders, careful not to wake her, and walked out onto the small front porch. The neighborhood was slowly waking up to the new day, the familiar call to prayer drifting softly through the morning air. Standing there in the quiet dawn, I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had spent decades pushing away the world, convinced that solitude was the safest armor a man could wear. I had believed that by locking the door on my past, I was protecting my peace. But looking back at the sleeping girl inside, I realized I had only been hiding from the very thing that gives life its true meaning, connection, forgiveness, and the courage to open our hearts when we least expect it. Life has a quiet, humbling way of answering the questions we were too afraid to ask, delivering us not what we planned, but precisely what we needed. Would you have done what I did? Would you have answered the phone, or let the past stay buried in the dark? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. This is Dad Revenge Lab. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care of your heart.